He walked into the Whitmore estate with a 7-year-old girl on his hip and a canvas tool bag slung over one shoulder, and the woman at the front desk looked at him the way people sometimes looked at someone who had wandered into the wrong building. He didn't correct her expression. He just said his name. "Decker," he said. "I was called in by Mr. Whitmore." She checked her clipboard twice before she found it. The estate sat at the end of a long gravel drive outside Canada, 40 minutes from Ottawa, and it was the kind of property that didn't advertise itself. No gates with crests, no fountains. Just a long avenue of old maples and then a house that seemed to grow out of the landscape like it had always been there and always intended to stay. The garage was separate from the main house, a long, low building with 6 bays, and it held things that made Decker's hands go still the moment he stepped inside. He'd worked on cars for 22 years. He'd spent 12 of those as a powertrain engineer at a firm in Mississauga before everything changed, before he folded that life up like a letter he didn't want to read again and moved himself and his daughter to a town in the Ottawa Valley, where the rent was manageable and the questions were fewer. He knew engines the way other men knew scripture, by feel, by sound, by the particular silence that meant something was wrong. The car in Bay 4 was a 1966 Maserati Mistral, coupe, deep blue, and it had not started in 11 weeks. His daughter, Piper, pressed her nose against the glass of the passenger window and fogged it up. She was 7 years and 4 months old. She had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's habit of going very quiet when she was thinking very hard about something. "Is it sick?" she asked. "Something like that," Decker said. She nodded, like that was a reasonable answer, and sat down cross-legged on a shop stool, with the little notebook she carried everywhere, the one with the green cover and the broken elastic strap, and she began drawing what appeared to be the car from memory, though she had only looked at it for 40 seconds. He had not meant to bring her today. His neighbor Faye had promised to watch Piper on Saturdays, and she had kept that promise for 4 months without fail. But this morning, Faye's kitchen pipe had burst, and there was water across the floor and a plumber on the way, and so Piper had come with Decker, the way she often came with Decker, quietly, without complaint, carrying her notebook. The man who met him in the garage was named Burnett. He was the estate manager, not Whitmore himself, and he had the careful bearing of someone who spent a great deal of time managing expectations. 3 separate technicians have looked at it, Burnett said, including the team from the dealership in Toronto. They had it for 2 weeks. What did they say? Burnett paused. They said the carburation system was beyond economic repair and recommended sourcing a replacement engine. Decker looked at the car. A replacement engine. For a 66 Mistral. He thought about what that would cost and what it would mean, and then he thought about what the dealership's technicians must have done and hadn't done, and he kept his face neutral. They brought it back 2 weeks ago, Burnett continued. Mr. Whitmore's exhibition is Saturday. This Saturday. Yes, it was Tuesday. Decker set his bag down on the workbench and looked at the car for a long moment without touching it. That was the first thing he always did. He just looked. Piper had asked him once why he did that, and he had said, "Because the car will tell you where it hurts if you give it a moment." She had thought about this for a while, and then said that was also true of people. He had not had an answer for that. The Mistral's engine was a twin-cam inline-6, and it was beautiful the way functional things are beautiful, without trying to be. He checked the fuel delivery first, then the ignition timing. He found what he expected to find. Not catastrophic failure, not a blown component, not anything that required replacement. What he found was a compounding series of small problems, each one tolerable on its own, each one masking the others, the way small lies do. The carburetor needles were worn and seated wrong. The distributor cap had a hairline crack, invisible unless you held it at an angle to the light. The vacuum advance had seized partially. None of these things alone would have stopped the engine. Together, they had stopped it completely. The dealership technicians had, as far as he could tell, run diagnostics on a car that didn't respond to diagnostics the way modern cars did, concluded the system was compromised, and written a report recommending the most expensive solution available to them. Decker did not say this out loud, he began. Piper ate the sandwich he'd packed for her at 12:30, sitting on her stool, her notebook now filled with what appeared to be a detailed schematic of the carburetor's float bowl, copied from a manual she had pulled from his bag without being asked. She could not read most of the technical language, but she copied the diagrams with precision. "Dad," she said, without looking up. "Yeah, what's a hurry?" he told her. She wrote it down. Burnett came by at 2 o'clock and again at 4, each time with the same look. Not impatient, exactly, but watchful. At 4, he brought tea, which Decker hadn't expected, and a glass of juice for Piper, which she accepted with the gravity of someone receiving something important. "How's it looking?" Burnett asked. "It's looking like a car that can run," Decker said. Burnett went still for a moment. "You're certain?" "Not yet," Decker said honestly. "By tonight." He didn't say it to be impressive. He said it because it was true, and because saying things that weren't true had never gotten him anywhere useful. The afternoon light moved through the high garage windows in long bars, and the estate went quiet around them the way large properties go quiet in the early evening. Not empty, but settled. Decker worked through the carburetor methodically, cleaning and seating the needles, replacing the float valve with a part he had brought in his bag because he had read the service notes the dealership had filed and had made his own assessment before he'd ever arrived. The distributor cap came out. He had a replacement for that too. He set the vacuum advance, checked the timing with the dial gauge, went back and checked it again. Piper fell asleep on the shop stool at 6:30. She had tilted sideways until her cheek rested on the workbench. Her notebooks, still under one hand, the green cover creased. He found a folded drop cloth on a shelf and put it over her shoulders. She didn't wake. She slept the way she always slept, completely, as though she had decided to trust that the world would still be there when she came back to it. He worked in silence after that. He thought about Meredith sometimes when he worked. Not always. Not the way he had in the first year, when she had been everywhere, in everything. In the smell of a particular kind of coffee, in the quality of late October light, in the sound of a phone ringing in another room. Now she came to him more quietly, in the shape of Piper's hands, in the way Piper sat, spine straight, head tilted, something in the posture that Decker recognized without being able to name it. He thought, Meredith would have liked this car. She had not known cars the way he did, but she had liked beautiful things for the right reasons. Not because they were expensive, but because of what they represented. The hours of human thought that went into making them. He had not told Piper yet that tonight's job would pay the November bills. He didn't tell her those things. She was 7. What she knew was that her father fixed things, that fixing things was useful, and that sometimes she got to come along, which she preferred to staying home. The distributor cap went in. He reconnected the vacuum advance line. He checked every connection twice, running his hands along each one in the dark quiet of the garage. Then he primed the fuel system and let it sit. Piper woke up at 9:15. She sat up and looked around with the particular unperturbed calm of a child who is accustomed to waking in unusual places. And then she found him and relaxed. "Did you fix it?" she asked. "I'm about to find out." She climbed down from the stool and came to stand beside him, the drop cloth still around her shoulders like a small cape. She reached up and put her hand in his. He turned the key. The Mistral's engine caught on the second rotation and settled into an idle that was even, steady, and clean. Not struggling, not hesitating, just running the way it had been designed to run half a century ago, the sound of it filling the garage like something returning from a long way off. Piper said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "It sounds like it was waiting." He didn't trust his voice right away. He put his hand on her shoulder, and they stood there together in the garage while the engine ran. And he thought that this was the thing nobody told you about working alone. That the victories were very quiet, and there was nobody to tell. And then he looked at the top of his daughter's head and revised that thought. He texted Burnett from the driveway. The reply came in 4 minutes. "Please wait. Mr. Whitmore would like to come down." The man who walked into the garage 11 minutes later was older than Decker had expected. Mid-70s, with the compact, measured bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms where things were decided. He wore a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, and he looked at the car before he looked at anything else. That told Decker something about him. Whitmore stood at the open bay and listened. "They said it needed a new engine," he said finally, not as an accusation, more like a man revisiting a story he'd been told and finding it strange now that he was in possession of new information. "The car didn't need a new engine," Decker said. "What did it need?" "It needed someone to take the time to understand what it was actually telling them." Whitmore looked at him then. Then he looked at Piper, who was sitting on her stool again with her notebook, writing something down. Then he looked back at Decker. "Your daughter?" he asked. "Yes." Whitmore nodded slowly. He had a look that Decker recognized, the look of a man who had seen many things and had made peace with most of them. "She was here the whole time?" "She's usually where I am," Decker said. He said it without apology. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. The engine idled. Then he said, "My son used to sit in my workshop when he was small. I built furniture then, before all of this." He made a gesture that seemed to encompass the estate and everything in it. "He'd sit exactly like that and draw what I was doing." He paused. "He's in Vancouver now. Does very well." Decker didn't say anything. "The technicians from the dealership charged me $4,000 to tell me the car was irreparable," Whitmore said. "What do I owe you?" Decker told him. Whitmore looked at him for a moment with an expression that Decker couldn't quite read. Then he said, "That's not enough. It's what I charge. It's not enough for what you've done." Decker held his gaze. "It's what I charge," he said again quietly. Whitmore nodded. He didn't argue. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and produced a check already written for twice the amount Decker had quoted. Decker looked at it. He thought about the November bills. He thought about the furnace in the garage at home that had been making a sound it shouldn't be making. He thought about Piper's winter boots, which she had grown out of without mentioning it until last week, and when he'd asked how long she'd known they didn't fit, she'd said, "Since September, but I didn't want to say anything." He took the check. "The exhibition is Saturday," Whitmore said. "It'll be ready," Decker said. Whitmore looked at the car one more time. Then he looked at Piper's drawing, which she had turned around to show him without being asked. The car, rendered in pencil, with the hood open and the engine exposed in cross-section. Surprisingly accurate. He studied it for a long moment. "What's your name?" he asked her. "Piper," she said. "Do you like cars, Piper?" She considered this seriously. "I like understanding how things work," she said. Whitmore looked at Decker then with an expression that was difficult to describe. Something between recognition and something older than that. "She's good at it," Decker said. "I can see that," Whitmore said. The drive back to town took 40 minutes on the highway, the dark fields going past on either side, the lights of Ottawa fading in the rear view. Piper was in the back seat with her notebook and her seatbelt fastened and her forehead against the window. "Dad," she said after a long while. "Yeah, that car sounded really good when it started." "It did," he agreed. "Did that make you happy?" He thought about this for a moment, the way she asked things, not to fill silence, but because she genuinely wanted to know. He had learned in the last 3 years that her questions were always real questions. She didn't ask things to be polite or to make conversation. She asked because she was actually wondering. "Yeah," he said. "It made me happy." "Me too," she said. He watched the road. A transport truck passed, going the other direction, its lights flooding the cab for a moment and then gone. He thought about the first year after Meredith, which had been the longest year he had ever lived through. He thought about the way time had moved then, not slowly exactly, but thickly, like trying to walk through something that resisted. He had not known then that he would come out the other side of it. He had not known it was something you came out the other side of. The people who told him it would get better had seemed well-meaning and distant, like they were describing a country they had read about but never visited. But here was the thing nobody said. It didn't get better the way they described. It didn't smooth out into some peaceful equilibrium where you stopped noticing the absence. What happened instead was that the world filled back in, slowly around the absence, not replacing it but surrounding it the way water fills in around a stone. And what filled in mostly was her, Piper, who asked real questions and drew technical schematics for fun and fell asleep on shop stools and woke up without complaint, and had, at the age of 7, already developed strong opinions about the structural integrity of carburetor float valves. He didn't know if he was doing it right. He didn't know most days if he was doing any of it right. He just knew that she ate well and slept well, and her teacher said she was curious and kind, and that every morning she came downstairs and said, "What are we doing today?" And the we of it still hit him somewhere he couldn't name. He pulled into the driveway of their house at 20 to 11. The neighbor's light was off. The maple tree in the front yard had dropped most of its leaves, and they were dark shapes on the pale grass. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment. "We're home," he said. Piper looked up from her notebook. She looked out the window at the house with the particular look she had, taking inventory, deciding that everything was where it was supposed to be. Yeah, she said. He carried her inside. She was not asleep, but she let herself be carried the way she sometimes did, her arms around his neck and her chin on his shoulder, and her notebook still in one hand. He got her as far as the couch before she said she could walk the rest of the way, and she did. Up the stairs in her socks, the green notebook tucked under her arm. He sat at the kitchen table for a while after that, not thinking about anything in particular. The check was in his jacket pocket. The bills were in a folder on the counter. The furnace was going to need looking at, but the car had started. The engine had caught on the second rotation and run clean, and he had known it would, and knowing things like that, knowing them in the particular way he knew them, through his hands and his ears and 22 years of quiet accumulation, was the one thing he had never been able to explain to anyone who hadn't felt it themselves. He got up and put the kettle on. From upstairs, muffled by the ceiling and the floor, and the particular insulation of an old house in a valley town, he heard Piper's light click off. He stood at the counter and waited for the kettle and thought she had drawn the engine in cross-section from memory after 40 seconds. She had asked what a venturi was and written down the answer. She had held his hand in the garage when the engine started and said it sounded like it was waiting, and that had been, as far as Decker was concerned, the most accurate thing said by anyone in that building all day. He did not know what she would do with any of it. He did not know what kind of person she was becoming or what kind of life she would build. He just knew that she was his, and that every morning she came downstairs and said we, and that for now, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole of the thing. The kettle clicked. He poured the water and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark yard and the bare maple and the quiet street where nothing moved, and he thought that there were worse things than a Tuesday night in a town in the Ottawa Valley, with a car fixed and a daughter asleep upstairs, and the November bills paid and the tea going warm in his hands. He drank it standing up. Then he turned off the light and went to bed.